is particularly memorable. So take a moment and put in the chat. What kind of English class do I remember most? And maybe one or two reasons why. Brenna, are you seeing anything? Oh, here we go. We have a few coming up in the chat.
I can help you if you would like.
You know what? I think I'm good, but I may call on you once in a while. I have another screen open,
Go
but
right
thank
ahead.
you for that. Okay, Sandra says the ones where we read literature. Literature. So it's the material that connected you. Brenna shares one of the most memorable is where the teacher made part of the learning process. I was part of the learning process. My teacher made the class amusing, Alma shares. Erwin shares when I began to recognize patterns and symbols. Lourdes, when I put into practice what is being taught. Very nice. Maritza, the class that involved everyone, engaging, motivating, and fun. And Irma, applied linguistics when I learned pronunciation through the sounds of pronunciation through video. Very good. So this is a nice sort of overview as we move into this presentation and in different ways. Everyone's talking about how the class brought you in, how it motivated you, how it made some sort of connection with you. So let's talk a moment about the movement that we've seen in English language teaching from traditional methods to interactive methods. Now, this is just a snapshot or one picture of traditional methods in English language teaching. And English, and in fact, all language teaching. But in terms of English language teaching, this has really been the way that languages were taught for decades, for a long time. And of course, we still have elements in many of our classrooms. But let's take a look about some of these traditional methodologies because it's hard to talk about new methodologies and newer methodologies without understanding what came before us. So one of the traditional methodologies is, of course, a teacher-centered classroom where the teacher is providing more of a lecture, where the teacher is at the front of the room, all the students sitting in rows looking at the teacher at the front of the room, where the teacher is seen as the one who has all the knowledge, the one who is going to impart all the knowledge, the one who poses the questions, and then the students answer very much at the front of the classroom. And sometimes the teacher may or may not be using the target language, may or may not be using the target language, which means the teacher may not even be providing the model of the language use. Another part of traditional language teaching methodologies was that it was grammar focused, rule based, where the teacher standing in front of the room would provide the rules, the grammar rules that then the students needed to memorize and be able to say back and perhaps at some point begin to recognize those grammar rules in worksheets and written papers. Sometimes the focus may have been on talking about grammar rules, right? In a language other than the target language. But not as much a focus on usage other than worksheets and fill in the blanks. What kind of materials did we use in our traditional classrooms? Well, traditionally the textbook. There was a textbook that was our main source material in the classroom. And then of course worksheets and worksheets where the target language was reduced, where the target language was reduced to fill in the blanks or very discrete points of grammar or discrete points of vocabulary. And what did the students do in all of this? Well, they filled out worksheets, but they memorized rules and they memorized phrases. They memorized certain aspects of the language and language usage. And they would maybe memorize role plays rather than creating role plays. And so, what all of this meant in the classroom was that there was limited student talk time. Students were not as engaged. Students were not challenged to really ask questions about language usage. And it was very much seen as passive learning. Now, I know that we could generate more ideas about traditional learning, but this is enough to set the stage for the conversation that we're having now. So think for a moment. I think for a moment on your own language learning experiences. And I'm sure all of us have experienced what we call now traditional ELT methodologies. I'm sure we all have experienced and continue to experience these methodologies. The question is whether or not that's all we get in our language classroom. Okay, so take a moment and please put in the chat and share your thoughts from your own experience as a language learner. What are the limitations of traditional ELT methodologies? So, as a language learner, from your own experience, or you can respond from as a teacher as well, but from your own experience, what are some limitations of traditional ELT methodologies? Okay, answers are starting to come in. Darcy, limited interaction among students. So clearly you feel that it's important for students to interact. Irma, okay, it hampers communication. Oh, again, Brenna, it's very teacher centered. Teresa shares, some of them don't give opportunities for the students to practice the language. It's focused on rules and knowledge. And again, there's nothing wrong with rules and knowledge, but that's not all we want to do. The main limitation, Minor shares, it relies on the use of the target language. That means that oral skills is not fostered or promoted. Very good. And often we see that students who are produced out of this kind of traditional language learning methodology, that they will fare better in reading and writing, but not they will not do well in speaking and listening. Very good. And communication. Students memorize but not how to use language authentically. Very good. Very good. All right, so let's move forward. Now we have an idea as to what traditional methods were like or still like, but what the limitations are. Now, notice I didn't say complete moving away. There is a role for these kinds of methodologies, but let's now look at the shift. Now, the shift away from traditional ELT methodologies has been going on for a while, as we know. When we look at language acquisition theory has shown us time and time again that languages are best learned through using them. Languages are best learned by using language in real life situations, in authentic situations, and often using materials intended for the native speaker. But even more than that, let's take a look at some of these ideas here as to why it's so important not to focus just solely on traditional methodologies. So, for example, we have global communication needs. If we're learning a language, a target language in a bubble or in just in that class, maybe we'd get away with creating that little environment. But if we're talking about raising up and using language in order to communicate globally, it is certainly the focus needs to be on communication, interacting with speakers, other speakers, and interacting with all of the language skills so that we're not only developing reading and writing, but we're developing listening and speaking as well. And of course, the focus on diverse learners. Traditional methodologies tend to look at learning with really one aspect of teaching, of a theory of teaching and learning. So, one aspect of a theory of learning, and often does not take into account that we all learn in different ways. We learn in different ways, we process information differently. And therefore, since we learn in different ways, it's very important for the teacher to use different teaching strategies, right? It's important to use different teaching strategies to attend to the different needs of our learners. So an ELT traditional methodology is really going to work for a small subset of our learners. As I've already talked about, the emphasis on real world communication. And then, of course, technology. As technology tools have continued to develop, the language use, the native language use in those technology tools has grown. So maybe we had gone from, using the computer to receive information. We are now 20, 30 years later using technology for interaction, such as we're doing here. So the shift from traditional ELT methodologies occurred for research reasons, for language learning reasons, language teaching reasons, as well as real life reasons. So let's explore this a little bit further in terms of what it means for the actual classroom. So some interactive methods in action include having a student-centered environment. So student-centered, where the student is posing questions, the student is using the language, and where we know the students come with knowledge already in place. The students are not coming knowing nothing. The students aren't coming to our class as blank slates, just the opposite. They have knowledge that we can activate. They have prior knowledge that we can activate. They have cultural knowledge. They do have linguistic skills. And of course, depending on the age, they'll have different content skills and social emotional skills as well. So interactive methods moving away from traditional methods include being student-centered and of course, focused on collaboration and task-based activities. Some of these methods, there are many, but I've highlighted here some of those key methods, and they include the flipped classroom, blended learning, project-based learning, or BPL, gamification, and integration of technology through different tools that are available to us. So let's talk about those a little bit in turn. Project-based learning is when students will work on real-world projects that require them to apply the knowledge and also to develop the skills such as teamwork, problem solving, creativity, collaboration, etc. Project-based learning is often thematic, where we'll use a theme to organize different learning objectives. So learning objectives organized around a theme, but then the tasks through the project are based in the real world. And students are using multiple language skills, plus they are using interactive modalities, typically with their fellow students. So project-based learning is a lot to learn, but that is a nice overview. The flipped classroom. The flipped classroom is opposite from the traditional classroom. So you can see right there the picture that we have. In the traditional classroom, the teacher's at the front of the room, the students are sitting in rows looking at the teacher, and the teacher is saying, okay, here's the topic for today. And tonight, when you go home, here's your homework. So the teacher is presenting the topic, and then the students will go home and practice with homework. And as it says there, the teacher is the sage on the stage. The teacher is the wise person at the front of the room, the sage on the stage. With the flipped classroom, we flip it, we turn it around, and students will learn new material at home before they come into class. They might use readings, they might use videos, or any other materials that we'll talk about in a minute. And then class time is used for interactive activities, for questioning, for discussions, and for problem solving. So the flipped classroom, as you can see on the right-hand side, well, my right-hand side of the screen, where the students come to class having already read introductory information about the topic, and they can come right into activities right? So the teacher is no longer the sage on the stage. The teacher's role is the guide on the side, the guide on the side. And see how the students are organized. They're in little clusters, looking at each other and communicating with each other. And then the homework for that evening would be either to practice more or to then introduce the next topic that they'll be focusing on the following day. Now, this gets us, it's that a lot happens in the flipped classrooms with students who have already read the information coming in, ready to work on activities. They've already activated that prior knowledge. They've connected prior knowledge with the new knowledge. And now they're coming to class with the questions in place, with ideas in place, and they're ready to learn, ready to learn actively, not passively. How about blended learning? Blended learning is another interactive method where that's combining online and offline learning activities. Combining online and offline learning activities. So you'll have classroom activities, but then at home you would have, or at home or in the classroom, you'd have online learning or even mobile learning. And what that does is that brings in the different sources, different kinds of sources of input, of language input, and encourages students to actively engage in different ways of output. So that's blended learning. Gamification, as the name suggests, gamification is going to be using elements of what we know as games to increase the engagement in the learning process. So, for example, it might add behaviors that we associate with games, such as getting rewards or getting points or increasing in points, getting badges to a lesson. And that really, that if you've used gamification, it can really get students motivated because of extrinsic rewards. Now, this doesn't have to be a competition. Using gamification, sometimes folks equate that with creating a competitive environment in the class, and it doesn't have to be. All right, you can have them in groups, all right, and it can also be where the peers are helping each other. So it doesn't have to be a competitive environment. It can be, but there are different ways to incorporate game-like elements. And so what you're doing is you can also activate those extrinsic rewards, but you can activate the intrinsic rewards as well, and to activate that self-motivation. The other thing about gamification, which is very, very helpful for an active classroom, is that it will encourage the students to monitor themselves. If it's not simply a win or lose, but if you create a game where you use elements where they're getting points and students can see progress, that will encourage them to activate their own self-regulation, activate their own self-regulation for learning, where they can monitor their own progress. There's a lot to say for teaching students how to self-regulate, to self-monitor their own learning. Okay, and then the last part of the activities is technology integration, where we're using lots of different kinds of technology in the classroom. Whiteboards, we can be using apps, online simulations, and lots of other tools. And I think it's very important to remember, especially in environments that may not have all of these technologies available, it's very important to remember that we can use whatever technology is available to us, even in lower resource environments. Because often, even if the school doesn't have that technology, often the students do, or the community does, or the library does, or a community center. So even though we don't have the technology in our school just yet, we can still look for other ways of bringing in the technology. So, what are the benefits of interactive methods? Well, think about what you put in the chat. Think about the limitations that you've already put in the chat, the limitations to the traditional methodologies. And here we have the flip or the other side of that. So, here are some of the benefits when we really do use interactive methods. So one, students are actively involved in the learning process through discussions, hands-on activities, and problem solving. Now, I teach teachers, as you know, I teach at the Johns Hopkins University, and I work with pre-service teachers. And it's really interesting to see that when they do their student teaching in the very beginning, they will very often use traditional methodologies, but use the language of interactive methodologies. So, for example, for number one, sometimes they'll do a presentation in class and they'll say, okay, discuss amongst yourselves. And because they're using the word discussion, they feel that they're doing interactive methods. It's not enough to say, discuss amongst yourselves. What's important is to give them a task, right? To make sure they understand the task, that it's something hands-on, something that's going to activate their prior knowledge, activate the challenges, and then to a task that is very specific, where the different group members are engaged with different roles. And then, of course, at the end of the activity, there should be an outcome. So it's just really important to remember not just to use the language of interactive methods, but to make sure to use all pieces of the methodology. Number two, another benefit to interactive methods includes student engagement. And some of you have mentioned that in the chat already. Learning is more interesting, but also is more relevant. It applies to me and it applies where I can apply meaning. We do have, if we organize our classes using interactive methods, we do see an improvement in critical thinking and problem solving. If there's active learning going on, if we're using project-based approaches, all of this will encourage students to see what the problem is, understand the problem or the challenge in their own words, analyze it, evaluate it, and move toward a solution. Why do we use collaborative activities? Collaborative learning really does help students with those other kinds of skills that they're going to need in real life communication, in real life scenarios, out in the community, once they get a job, once they move on to university. And those skills are teamwork and communication skills. And teamwork is a lot. Teamwork is making sure that you do your part of the project, making sure that you don't rely on just one person in the group. Teamwork includes respecting ideas of other students, right? Not shooting down, not dismissing the idea of another student. And these are things that we can teach and we should teach as part of collaborative activities. How can students engage where they explore each other's ideas and they don't dismiss an idea? How do we teach them not to say but to say and? And how can we encourage them to take on leadership roles and follower roles? Follower is not a bad word. Followers often become good leaders, but we take turns being leaders in our groups and we take turns being followers in our group. So collaborative learning and project-based work helps with it really developing these important skills, and more so, these important skills in the target language. Number five, interactive methods, as I've already described, help us better to adapt the diverse needs of our students who have different kinds of needs, they learn differently, and they might have other kinds of needs. And it also encourages our students to interact with each other, to help each other with their different kinds of needs. For example, there may be one student in class who has a visual disability. Well, in collaborative work, you're going to help those students in that group better understand how they can work with that student who has a visual disability. And on the other hand, that student with the visual disability, you can now help them to use their skills, how they can shine to help their other students. And finally, interactive methods can only set us up better for the 21st century. As technologies advance, as technology becomes much more interactive, it's very important that we engage our students in the technology to help them keep up with the technology and to be able to use the target language in the developing technology. So there are more benefits that we could discuss, but these are certainly the highlights. All right, here is a little application activity, brainstorm activity. Think about everything we've just said How would you make a grammar lesson on reported speech interactive? So let's suppose you're teaching a grammar lesson on reported speech. How could you make that interactive? Do you have some ideas? And just put it in the chat. I know this is hard because I've introduced ideas, but now we're applying them, but that's okay. Everyone here, I believe, is at a different level. Some are beginning teachers, and some are very, very experienced, and some of you are teacher educators. So let's put in the chat some ideas of how we might make a grammar lesson on reported speech interactive. Interview. Okay. Okay. Brenna says have an interview and a reporter game. That's wonderful. Absolutely. Yes, you can take turns being an interviewer and take turns being the reporter. I want to share with you on the very first day of class, this is one of my favorite activities to do. I put my students, and again, they're teachers, they're going to become teachers. I put them into pairs and I ask them to take turns interviewing each other. And I give them one or two general questions. Why are you in this class? Tell us a little bit about yourself. And I'll usually say, ask a fun question. And then they take turns interviewing each other. But then they take turns presenting on each other. And I'll tell you what I learned from that. Most of my students who are going to be English teachers come from countries outside of the United States. Most of my teachers are international teachers. So I get to learn their language ability, their fluency, their cadence. I learn a lot about them other than the actual activity. Okay, Oscar says, get the students to understand the context, the situation, and the task. Excellent. And then negotiate new meanings and interests. I love that negotiation idea because that's the back and forth. Okay. Paul, have students interview each other, then report out. Great. Dahlia, watch a video and report and listen and report. You're getting the listening skills and the reporting skills. Nice. I have students tell a story, then retell the story. Very nice. Storytelling, gossiping, nice. Watch review, very nice. Okay, so a lot of activities. So a lot of this, you have some of these examples, they're engaging with a video or reading, and in some of your examples, they're engaging with each other. Very nice. Moving on to the sex is the second part, embracing authentic materials and real life communication. So what are authentic materials? I think as we know, authentic materials are materials that are designed for real life. They're not designed for language learning, they're designed for the native speaker typically. And I joined early and I was fortunate to hear the presenter just before me. And I really love the idea of using authentic materials within the context. So within your own country, within your local town, use those authentic materials that the students might be familiar with. And that is one way to really uplift the local context. But authentic materials are not intended for language learners. They're intended for real life use of the native speaker. There are lots and lots. Here are some examples: newspapers, magazines, brochures. So there's print materials. There's everyday objects, realia, menus, train schedules, videos, podcasts, social media posts. There are so many authentic materials as soon as we start looking around. Why? Why do we use authentic materials? Well, in the traditional environment, the textbook was our main material and whatever the teacher was able to provide him or herself. But with authentic materials, we're bringing in the real world relevance, which then encourages real world communication. We're bringing in the context-rich language use because we're pulling the materials from the environment around us. And of course, it can increase student motivation. Bring in a magazine that has information that the students really want to know about, a sports magazine or a fashion magazine, whatever it is that they want to know about. So they're going to work real hard to work with that language. And then, of course, the cultural exposure. But if we bring in the materials, the authentic materials from within our local context, we are much more than elevating and lifting up the materials from our own environments. And then, of course, beyond the classroom, we have authentic materials, podcasting, virtual exchanges. The technology has moved us beyond just the classroom. Now, here are some simple examples of how we might use authentic materials in tasks. Bring in some menus, have them practice ordering food and role playing ordering the food. Social media posts, have them read social media posts and respond. You can manage that in the class with given the different age levels. And videos, have them look at videos and share their opinions. Now, here is a big slide, everybody. And in one slide, I have lots of ideas for you. And what I wanted to do with this slide was to connect the authentic material with the language task with the collaborative task. So there's a lot going on here, but in each box, you have the authentic material followed by the language skills that we can practice, followed by the kinds of activities. So, for example, let's take a look at the one on the bottom there, songs. That might be a little easier to read. The blue box that says songs. So, songs would be the authentic material. What kind of language skill could we practice? Well, we can practice pronunciation. We can practice vocabulary building. We can practice understanding cultural references. Then let's take a look over at the movie clips. We can practice listening comprehension, we can practice understanding the plot, and we can practice speaking skills through role playing, for example. So I'm not going to read every square to you, but just take a moment and look at these. Now, those of you who are teacher educators, please, take this to your class, your teachers, and have them fill out give them as a starting point, have them fill out more ideas in these boxes. But what's really important is sometimes we talk about the authentic material and we talk about the activity without the in-between part, which is focusing on the language, right? And so that's what this is really handy for. So those of you who work with teachers, bring this to them and have them expand these boxes by adding the language skills that they're practicing and then adding more activities. And then of course add more boxes. But I hope you like this. I worked kind of hard on this and I use this with my own teachers, and you start them out with this and then their creativity takes off. Those of you who are in the classroom now, try practicing this, but don't forget it's the authentic material, the language skill, and then the activity. So, in summary, if we bring together interactive methodology and authentic materials, it's likely that we will move toward deeper learning. Students will engage more meaningfully in contextualized learning, and then teachers are facilitating the use of real language, the real use of language. And that's the hope. That's the hope, and that's the goal that we're working toward. Just bringing in a newspaper alone doesn't do it alone. Just putting them in groups alone doesn't do it. We have to bring in all the pieces of the methodology. So let's take one more chat chance here and brainstorm for yourself. Consider one kind of authentic material, and we just covered a lot: newspapers, podcasts, videos. How might you use it to help students practice authentic spoken communication? Feel free, just put it in the chat box. And I purposely wanted to keep with spoken communication, but you don't have to. You can post something about any other language skill. But I thought spoken communication would just keep us going in the same direction. Okay, Teresa, I don't know if this is from the last one or not, but Teresa says I would play, find someone who then they share with their class findings. Okay. Paul shares a short video from a news broadcast. The students watch it and then comment on it, and that leads to whole class discussion. Very nice. So the language that you're practicing clearly would be a certain. You can practice in particular grammatical structures, but also different linguistic structures in how you're communicating. Very nice. Children's books to practice reading out loud. I love that with a certain age group. And then do role playing. Oh, that can be fun even for the older students to practice role playing based on a children's book. I've used flight attendant instruction videos for students. Flight attendant. That's nice because that language tends to be very curated. Brochures, very nice. Okay, good. Great ideas. All right, let's move into our last part where I want to push our thinking either even further. Whoops. So I want to talk about contemporary issues in interactive ELT pedagogy. Contemporary issues. So here are some of the challenges that we now face, even though a lot of what we've been developing over time in ELT methodology has been the move away from traditional and the move toward authentic teaching, also authentic assessment. Contemporary, we have contemporary challenges with this, which means that this topic is still very much an issue for current research projects and for current action research projects. There's a lot left to learn. And so some of the challenges include, for one, is the digital divide. Not all students have equal access to technology. Not all schools have equal access to technology. And what is the problem? Why is that a challenge? Because then not all students are being included. Not all learners are included in using technology, right? And they're not going to be able to keep up with technology as technology increases in their native language or a different target language, right? So, what are some strategies? I don't want to say solutions, but what are some strategies if we are in a schooling environment where we don't have the technology that we're learning about in professional development like here? Well, we can use, even in low tech environments, we can use hybrid strategies. So in other words, we can bring in technology. Maybe the students have an iPhone, or the library, the community library, or another group that we can bring the technology in. Or even if we don't have the technology to bring into the classroom, we have activities, outside activities that they do. Remember the flipped classroom, outside activities that they do using the technology that they do have access to outside the classroom. So there are ways of problem solving and working around some of these digital divide issues. So I encourage you to think about how you can still use low tech with hybrid strategies, right? And think of blended learning, think of the flipped classroom. But this is a real problem. This is a real challenge all over the world. Another challenge, and this continues all over the world, is resistance to change. Even though we've been talking about moving away from traditional methodologies for 20 years, we've been talking about this. We still have to talk about it because there is very much resistance to change. So there's resistance, institutional resistance. There can be resistance on the part of the learners themselves, where learners equate traditional methodologies with real learning and real teaching. This is what we still face. And of course, we still face the issues of teaching with authentic materials and teaching with communicative activities, but we're still testing with traditional methods of testing. Okay. So what this means is we can attend to resistance to change by advocating, doing what we're doing here, understanding what it means, and then advocating in our classrooms and in our schools and within our institutions. And how do we advocate? There's nothing better than having the evidence. So having the evidence, tracking the changes that we do in the class, and tracking the changes of our own students' performance. And of course, don't even we have a whole other conversation to talk about testing and assessment and evaluation activities that are formative and summative and use many of these ideas for testing in authentic manners. But resistance to change is still an issue. Then, of course, there are teacher training gaps. There remains lack of training in interactive methods. And so, what are some strategies to avert that? Would include what we're doing here, professional development, of course, peer support, showing leadership within our own schools, and then reflective practice. It's really important for administrators and institutional institutions to support professional development within the schools. But it remains where there really is a push against these methodologies, and really where many teachers still are not learning the methodologies. Then, of course, there are cultural and linguistic sensitivities. Not all the materials are appropriate for all learners, so that is always going to be an issue. We can't just get our students joining in social media posts. We have to be real careful, very sensitive, not just culturally and linguistically, but also in terms of their age. So, of course, we have to be thinking about culturally responsive pedagogy as we introduce these materials and these methodologies to the students. Of course, we have to talk about artificial intelligence and, artificial intelligence, chat GPT, translation tools. And so what are some of the challenges that we face right now? We can look at the challenges as over reliance on the tools, or not knowing how to use the tools, or misusing tools. And often what we're seeing is that the use of AI, the students' use of AI, which can be a very good thing and an excellent thing for language learning, actually does the opposite. And it reduces their collaboration. It reduces their problem solving skills. It reduces even their ability to then interact with the technology in the target language. I'm not saying that artificial intelligence is a bad thing, certainly not. It's about using it properly to continue all of what we've just said, the benefits of interactive methodologies. So we do have an opportunity here. We have an absolute opportunity for us to learn how to use AI for our own development and for our own teaching. And then, of course, the opportunity for the learners. Another challenge is also an opportunity is the shift from native speaker norms, but also celebrating multiple Englishes and embracing diversity. This is something that can help. Interactive methodology is something that can help us as we're moving toward the contemporary issues of global Englishes. There isn't just one variety of English, there are global Englishes. And so interactive methodologies and using authentic materials and all kinds of authentic materials can push us further into the future as we see that we're talking about decolonizing English language teaching, decolonizing English language methodology, decolonizing English language learning. Interactive methodologies that use authentic materials from within one's own context can help with this contemporary movement. So, as I begin to conclude, some of my key takeaways I hope you have are that English language teaching continues to evolve, but as we move throughout the development, it remains that interaction and authentic involvement and interaction remain the key. And all of us are part of this transformation. So my presentation today was the future of English language teaching. I based it in foundations, but then I tried to move it further, thinking about methods, materials, and communication. So I'd like to invite you in our very final chat of my presentation. Can you just share maybe one idea from this presentation that you hope to implement in your future classroom, in whatever role you play, as a teacher educator, as a teacher, or maybe even as a student teacher? So if you can put in the chat one idea that you hope to implement. There's a lot of good ideas coming in. The flipped classroom. Okay. Role playing. Someone said bringing in research articles. Yes, that's especially important for teacher educators. Gamification. Yeah, Kahoot is a lot of fun. There's a lot, there are others out there. Okay, gamification. More authentic materials. Excellent. Very good. I'm excited that you're thinking of at least one thing to bring into your classroom. And with that, if you have any additional comment or any question, I leave it to Brenna if we do have time for any final words. But here I am. That's my QR code for my LinkedIn. I don't really do Facebook, but I do LinkedIn. But I would love to hear from you. I'd love to connect with you. So I am going to invite Brenna to come back on and to wrap us up. But I want to thank you so much and thank you for your participation. I loved being here. It was an absolute honor. Honor. Back to Brenna. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Suarez. As you have seen, this chat has been very interactive. Everybody has been commenting on the ideas that you presented. I think everything that you've talked about has been pretty useful for everyone, and people are still commenting on what are their main takeaways. They're talking about gamification, trying the flipped classroom. So I'm sure that um, there's a lot of takeaways that everybody is going to apply in their classrooms, moreover. So I think, yeah, and a lot of thank you, great presentations for you. So hats off for you, Dr. Suarez. And I don't know if there are any other questions. If not, then just remind you that we are going to our next session pretty soon. We're going to have a quick break and then we'll come back with our following sessions to close this experience. Again, thank you, Dr. Suarez, for such
Thank
an
you so much.
insightful presentation.
Have a wonderful rest of the conference. Thank you again. Okay, I'm going to log off, Brenna. Thank you so much again. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I just wanted to let you know that part of my comments here were from my colleagues. I'm here with a group of colleagues, ma'am. I'm going to show you.
Oh, nice. Oh, hi,
We're
everybody.
doing, so I think I have to take away my background.